What does it take to make workshops work? And how can we facilitate collaboration that sticks and leads to results? My name is Miriam Hatness, and with the Workshops Work podcast, I'm on the mission to find the magic ingredients that make workshops work. Today with me on the show is Gabriel Couture, and we speak about the design of workshops and events using the Integrative Facilitation Quadrants. So stay tuned. And by the way, if you don't have pen and paper at hand to take your own notes, why don't you visit workshops.work to download my free one-page summary. And now, enjoy the show. Gabe, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm happy to be here.
Yes, we're going to speak about facilitation. What a surprise.
I know.
And hopefully a little bit about facilitating events and large groups. I'm very curious.
Yeah, I think that's been a lot of what's been on my mind for the last year, and perhaps even more, without me noticing it.
Awesome. Let me pick your brain a little bit. And before we get there, the standard question. When did you start calling yourself a facilitator?
I knew this was coming. Listen, I have two relationships with the word facilitator and that question. So I think the most concrete and easiest way for me to answer is I worked for a small social enterprise called Spring Strategies that was led by a master integral coach and facilitator called Ellen Springer. And she's wonderful. She's a genius facilitator. And one of the programs that we offered for people often working in the nonprofit sector was a high impact facilitation course. So I participated in one of the courses in Amsterdam, a 3-day course. Don't ask me what the year was, 2018 maybe, or 2019. And I came out of it having learned a lot. And that's when I was certified from her course as being a facilitator. And I started thinking about facilitation as something that I did. Now, why do I have a funny relationship with the term? I have a full-time job where I'm not facilitating. Occasionally, I'll facilitate some meetings. Occasionally, I'll do like some internal workshops, but it's not common. So it's not my practice. I'm not a facilitator being paid to facilitate, even though I'm very interested in potentially moving in that direction. Where I think I do some facilitation, and I have done facilitation in the way that I think of it, is that for a number of years now, I've worked in community building and event design, where my purpose was to try to generate opportunities for participation in a active, self-reflective, creative manner from participants, whether it's from coordinating film races over a weekend or podcast making races, or self-directed like festivals where we had hundreds of speakers and people can propose their topics that they wanted to, present. So that's what I've been doing for some time. And at some point I realized, that was a form of facilitation too, of trying to achieve outcomes for a group of people by designing a process, and not necessarily being present as the facilitator in terms of an identity that was there, but in the design itself. I did a lot of hackathon organizing for a company for 2 years. And it's the same thing. You're setting the stage for stuff to happen.
And this makes me very curious. So how have you adjusted the way how you would facilitate the process or design the process of these large events after having finished your facilitation certification? To what extent did it change the way of working, doing, thinking, facilitating?
I think the thing I got most from the course in terms of concrete outcomes was one of the tools is a quadrant that I used that's divided into a subjective and an objective side and a personal and a collective side. And one quadrant is about, the I, the me, the person, purpose and meaning. The other one is about our interpersonal relationships. The other one is about actions on an individual level. And then the fourth quadrant is about systems and structures and how they work as impacting our sort of how we work and how we present ourselves to meetings, opportunities, and so on. And using that framework, I was able to see how I might add a bit of content and structure that would ease participants who have different orientations into the experience and make sure that they feel involved from the get-go and comfortable. So the thing about this quadrant, which is a quadrant that's based on integral theory, which I also have an associate coaching certification in, is that it's about capabilities, but it's also about how people orient. So I might be someone who very much orients from the purpose and meaning quadrant. I want to understand why we're doing something, So that needs to be presented somehow in the activity for it to be a success for me. Because otherwise I might wonder, what did I just spend my time doing? Others orient from more of an interpersonal relationship kind of position. And when they enter a meeting, an event, an activity, they need to know who's in the room. And if they know the people who are in the room, they need to know how they're feeling, where they're at, which is when we do activities like out of 0 to 10, how do you feel right now? So that if you know that someone's at a 1, well, don't take it too personally if they're being sort of not so cooperative because they feel like, not so good. And so you want to position that as something that's immediately available to an attendee of whatever it is you're organizing. So that's how it's really shaped how I see those events, those activities, and their structure. I want to satisfy the need of every orientation that is present. I want to make sure there's an agenda. I want to make sure that people understand how it fits within a bigger picture. I want to make sure that there are actions that they're going to take and that they understand that there are actions they're going to take. I want to make sure that people are sharing, are being present both emotionally, physically today in the virtual world in a different way, but emotionally, spiritually, just present. And then I want them to feel they know why they're there. And if I can generate an alignment for everyone with those 4 quadrants in place in my design, then I'm already in a better position to achieve success than if I'm not. And before I might have done that intuitively or failed completely, but now I know to go back on a system or something that I've designed and to say, oh, I did really well in this regard, but I completely omitted that piece. Why? I must have been so distracted, or I didn't have the time to think about it well. Or now it's like, I don't typically forget, but now it's like, okay, do I have that? Do I have that? I need to review my design. Here it is. I'm going to add it here. And so that's kind of what I've learned.
You basically have a checklist that would cover all the 4 areas of the quadrant.
Yes.
And then design around them to make sure that everything is present.
Exactly. Yeah. And then, you can think about, I like to take it even further. And then it's like, so, there's a time associated with your design. So when are those quadrants appearing and not appearing for people, right? It can't just be like checklist once, right?
This would have been my next question, whether there's a hierarchy in how you approach these quadrants in the sequence, but also in importance.
Yeah, yes, I would say so. And I think it depends on the context. There are some activities where no one knows each other and you'll want to make them feel more comfortable with why they're there than just throw them into a room where they're not ready to sort of share of themselves in a way that's constructive. The opposite might be true too, actually, at times. Sometimes you want to sort of destabilize their arrival into your space where they don't know people and say, hey, I'm throwing you into a room with strangers. This is the question I want you to answer. And then they come out of that and it's like, they're a bit like anxious or they're not so sure how to respond to the experience. And then you present them with something else that might like calm them down. So there's a hierarchy on how they're presented, but also if you look at a timeline, there's like the energy levels throughout the meeting or the workshop or the weekend long event where you want to sort of reinforce the fact that, we should take a moment right now to reassert the why. Has a why changed from, yesterday when you started your short film? Have you had the time to sort of actually connect with the people within your team? Or maybe we should have the different teams come together and talk about the challenges they're facing after 24 hours so that they're better prepared for the next 24 hours to go and accomplish their, short film that they've decided to work on, based on the container, the rules that we set for them. Yeah, I think there's a hierarchy because at times it makes sense in terms of what the audience wants, but there's a hierarchy in sometimes what you're trying to generate in the attendee. And sometimes you want to make them uncomfortable. Like, okay, you're here, you have to accomplish, act number 1. here's your first action you need to do, and I'm not even telling you why you're here yet. And then you come out of that and you're wondering, okay, what am I in? What did I get into? And then we move into something else where you sort of restage things so you feel more grounded.
So to what extent is it then important to you to have an understanding of the audience or the participants? Because I can imagine that someone who is rather rational and maybe an introvert wants first to know the why and really, really understand why someone is asking them for their time and attention. Whereas others cannot wait to jump into the experience and to meet everyone. And they actually don't really care why they're there as long as they can connect to other human beings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a real challenge. I think the quadrants help in that regard too, because as long as what I try to do is you try to at least check each quadrant off within this first certain amount of time of whatever it is you're designing, right? Even if you're starting with action, and typically it'd be easier for people to start with the purpose of things, you're not going to then wait till like 2 hours in to talk about the why. It has to come within the early portion of your design for you to satisfy the different orientations that people have. And that, works not only with different individual personalities, but also culturally, right? Like you will have certain cultures that are not as comfortable going straight into a interpersonal conversation with strangers. And others need that before even getting started, right? Like that's the only way you're going to get them into a state of mind that they're willing to take some actions, design a process, think about it in a bigger picture kind of way.
Yeah. And I assume that before the pandemic, you used to design the experiences of on-site events. Mm-hmm. And there it's more or less clear who the audience is going to be. And now that everything is online, it's much less sure or tangible who the audience will be and from where they're going to call in from. So it's much more diverse culturally, but also personality type wise. Mm-hmm. Would you design your online events and facilitate them in a different way because of this uncertainty? Or maybe it's something that is totally irrelevant.
No, I think the approach remains very relevant. Mm. I think there's a whole other layer of the challenge that happens online, and that's engagement, right? Because you might have people who orient from, a quadrant of purpose and meaning, but while your session is going on, while the, whatever it is you've designed that will satisfy that question is going on, they might actually be reading their email or like, watching something on YouTube that they find really interesting. So like your attention is so divided virtually that the biggest challenge is to actually like grab that person who's online and supposed to be engaged with your event and make them captive to what you've designed so that that they're fully there and that whatever it is or orientation is being satisfied and met by what you've designed. And I would say that's the biggest challenge for events is that in person, your participant is almost always going to be reachable. You can read a room or you can design something so that you keep on reminding them that they're in this activity, they're immersed in it. Virtually, even with the best intentions, that might not be true. So you really need to think slightly differently. And I would say the following is, in my in-person design, where a group will go through the whole process, I'm answering those, quadrants in the ways that we've discussed. When it comes to virtually, I design the event to satisfy all those needs, but I leave more room for self-directed behavior on the part of the participant to connect with what they think is most important, because I know that that's what's going to happen either way.
How do you do that?
Well, I think about the sort of the narrative of how the event is presented and where there are connection points. What are the touch points along the way that you're going to be able to use to attract, someone who really needs to be grounded within a framework, within a structure, a system of some kind. Where are the opportunities for people to connect in that event, and have them pick and choose, but it has to be present. It has to be designed in such a way that it's very clear what the why is and what the what is of each component of your event. So, it's like a playground and you try to give a narrative that you want them to follow, but it's a journey that they have to take themselves, because you can't force them into taking a specific journey. It's not going to happen.
That's so true. And thereby I have the impression you have to make it interesting enough by giving choice, but not overwhelming them with choice that it's so complicated that then they give up before they have even started.
Yes. However it is that you're getting them into your space virtually, you need to remove as many barriers as possible for all of those quadrants. It has to be as immediate an experience as possible for it to be available to them. Right?
And I actually like this twist that it's not about checking quadrants of, okay, I have done that, but to see the quadrants as obstacles, as you just described it. And how can I remove these obstacles?
Yes, that's an interesting point. Exactly. It's like you want to invite them into a living room, but they're already in a different mental living room, the actual physical living room. You want to invite them into a mental living room, but you have people who are in their own space. And whatever is the kind of thing that's going to invite them in, you have to clear the way of the other things that would scare them off, right? If someone is introverted and not ready to engage with others, or will never be during your event, then that can't be one of the steps along the way to get them to connect with what you're doing. In person, you have a bit more leeway, right? You can sort of read a room, or you can design something that feels more intimate on an immediate level than you can virtually, because at least people are there 100%, right? You know what I mean? Like as much as possible. You can still be distracted in person.
Yeah, and it's more self-directed. So you can step into a lobby and first look around or look on your phone to be sure that nobody will speak to you.
Yes.
If you step onto a video call, then you're immediately there, and then they throw you into a breakout room, and then there's no escape.
Yeah.
And I found this very inspiring, and I kept doing this when in your session within the Brain Date event, that you allowed, or you suggested that those participants who don't want to go into a breakout room, that they can just raise their hand or add a little kind of sign before their name, and giving them the chance not to engage on such a deep level so early. And I had the impression that this immediately changed everything, and people felt actually more invited to join the ride.
Yeah, I think you did a really great job during that event. So just for a bit of context, because I think it is useful to think about this, I just had intentionality is really important virtually. I mean, in person too, but virtually you have to leave space for intentionality in order for self-directedness to take place. So the event that you're referring to with Brain Date, it's I work for a company that offers Brain Dates, and Brain Dates is a peer-to-peer learning tool where you can connect with others based on shared interests. So you have a sort of marketplace of ideas that is generated by attendees, and then you can connect with them either one-on-one or in small groups around these ideas. So if you post something about like what are the best toppings you can put on a pizza, and you make it into a group for 5 people, then people who want to discuss that with you can jump right in. If you want to talk about your struggles with, addiction, on the other hand, something much more serious, you can maybe put it out as a one-on-one topic to have something very intimate. But that's only if you're comfortable with it. So for our event and for your session and for the design of such opportunities, what we're trying to do and what we think is most effective is making everything intentional on the part of the individual. Right? And what you did well is, and what a good facilitator does well somehow, is generate a sense of confidence and comfort in the attendee that they don't feel the need to say no, that their intention is sort of driven by the energy of the space of the leader, whatever you want to call it, the lead, facilitator, the host, in such a way that everybody participates.
Yeah.
And you did it, for example.
And I was not fishing for compliments, because I remember that you made me aware that this could be the case, that the participants could feel less comfortable in joining the breakout rooms. So you actually gave the inspiration to do that. I was just the executor. That's why I'm giving the compliment right back. I was not fishing for it. So you attended all of these events and you designed the sequence and the onboarding of it, or the structure around it. So what have you learned from this process?
Events remain very hard to do. Even with the best designs, even with content that is going to be really valuable. I think the biggest struggle now, and this is true of in-person and virtual, but more so virtual, is this idea of like the captive audience. We have so many distractions and things happening that to commit to stuff is a real challenge, right? And to design an event that is going to be successful, somehow you have to have a community of people that is willing to participate. And so you can do that in two ways. One, you already have a community, right, that you're working with. Or two, is you try as best as possible to communicate, to position your event, your experience, on social media platforms, in press releases, in one-on-one conversations with people as something that like would interest them and they should take the time for themselves to attend. And so, I know this doesn't necessarily relate to facilitation, but I think it's also about empathizing with where people are coming from, in that they're giving you of their time when they do ultimately choose to be there. And you can't provide them with a passive experience, in my mind. It can't be one directional, right? Presentations are boring. Like, just give me a book. Or like, I'll watch the YouTube video of the same person speaking. You have these keynote speakers and all this stuff. And it's like, what a waste. What a waste. Like, share the YouTube link before the event. But that can't be the event. There's nothing happening. So there's a respect in the fact that you've asked people to be there, and that you need to satisfy where they orient from, but also what makes it experience human. That's, it's complex. So I think that's maybe how it relates to facilitation.
And I think it relates to facilitation at its core, where it's all about the group and the experience of the individual, and it's not about the facilitator. And it's exactly about this empathy to where they're coming from and where would you like to guide them to.
Yeah.
And while you were speaking, I wonder whether it is more difficult or easier. I mean, independent of the potential for distraction, I get that. So behind the screen, it's out of your control. Well, you can invite people and you can make it more interesting. But from a facilitation or logistics point of view, do you think it's easier or more difficult to deal with large groups online versus on-site?
Well, I mean, the immediate difference is like getting a sense of the room, right? Like, I've heard you say this actually, where the one problem with breakout rooms, and they're wonderful, is that you can't actually jump into the breakout room and see how people are feeling if they're awkward and can't, don't feel comfortable with each other. On the other hand, virtually, with the little tools that we have now and the games that can be played, it provides like enormous amounts of flexibility and an ability to like switch the action within the span of a second, right? Like, in person, if you're dealing with 150 people and you're trying to do breakout groups of 10 people and you would like to do multiple in a row, like, forget it. It takes like, 20 minutes to get people out of their conversation to join that other table over there. It's like a massive problem to coordinate. On the other hand, on the tool like Zoom, and you do breakout room, you can literally have them come out of the breakout room, recreate the breakout rooms, and send them back within the matter of moments. And that's fun. That's really fun. That's an opportunity that you cannot reproduce in person. So on the one hand, I think it is a bit, on the one hand, it's harder to work with large groups, but on the other hand, you have opportunity. So it's about how you use the tools that are available to you.
And what comes to my mind, actually, we're talking about distractions, and I didn't want to bring distractions into this part of the conversation. But as you were speaking, when we break out groups in an on-site event, it is so quick that someone says, or I just quickly grab a coffee, or while we are forming the group, I just go to the loo, right? So these are the distractions on site, or let me quickly get my phone out, and then suddenly nothing happens. And as a facilitator or host of a large event, you can stand there and sing and ask them and beg them, and nothing happens, right?
Yeah.
Whereas with the Zoom superpowers, it's a click away. And I've never heard of it might happen from time to time that someone says, oh, let me quickly grab a coffee or do something. But in general, they're very respectful of
I would agree.
The others who are actually sitting there and waiting for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you can even make sure that they are by, adding a 10-minute break every 45 minutes or hour, where you tell them, okay, go do this now. And then you can just go through, 3 15-minute breakout rooms. And like you said, like, people are very, very respectful for the most part in those situations. Yeah, it's tough, in person you can have, like, if it's not coffee or this or that, it's simply 3 people from a group of 10 that have started a conversation that they think is fascinating, and you just can't get them out of that conversation. They keep on walking together to one other area of the room, and they're talking, and they just don't listen. Whereas breakout rooms, it's like you're back into the main lobby of Zoom, and I've muted all of you. Listen to me.
Listen to me now. Yeah. I keep on experimenting with that. And I'm still unsure of the perfect way to get people back from the breakout groups. Because as you say, they get into such deep conversation so quickly. And then it almost feels rude to tell them, okay, 30 seconds, now you come back.
Mm-hmm.
So I've heard, or I experienced from one facilitator, it was Patrick Howden. And he said, you know what? Please come back when the time is up, but the room will remain open. So that's an invitation to come back without forcing them to do so. And on the one hand, I'm full of awe of this way of facilitation, this trust in the group. On the other hand, I catch myself that if they are then not back within 10 or 15 seconds, I get nervous. And I'm like, what shall we do? Shall we continue? Shall we wait? What is your gut feeling or your experience with that?
Yeah, I think I do this too. And I think it's common. It's either we give too much time or not enough time. And it's mostly not enough time in breakout rooms. This is where it's hard as a facilitator, I feel, to know how much conversation is taking place and are people okay, but maybe it's like a lack of confidence that we currently have with the technology and the individuals who are participating to be able to, fill space with discussions and questions to each other. I think it goes back again to setting the stage if I'm thinking about the systems and structures quadrant, right? Like, I've told everybody they're going to be 10-minute breakout rooms. This is what you need to achieve. This is the question, like clarity, purpose, and when you want to get into it, out of it, needs to be clear before they get in. Yeah. And, there's certain situations where we think we get caught up in the process of having things happen, and we forget little things. So for example, we are doing a workshop during Design Year 2021, during that week, where we sent people in a breakout room and they had very clear things that they needed to ask of each other. And because we were doing these short sessions, they were over lunch in terms of certain facilitators being available at that time. The facilitator hadn't planned like an extra 2 or 3 minutes just for everyone to go around and say what their name was, who they were, where they were located to the other participants. And that was very jarring, right? And so you have to give space for what needs to happen in order for you to be able to realistically expect them to come out when you want them to come out. And the one thing I see consistently is lack of clarity when you're going into the group.
Yeah.
And why, how much problems that causes with like, oh, we only really got to talking like midway through. It's like, well.
So true, because, and it refers to the slowing down to speed up thought, that if you allow participants to just introduce themselves, even if it's just their name and the location where they're calling from, then it puts them into ease to then also work on the task, whatever it is to do in the breakout group. But if you throw them in, answer this question, it's like them running into a wall, like, what are we supposed to do? And it feels awkward immediately.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I work with an organization called Cave Day, and they do these focus work sessions called sprints. You can do an hour sprint or 3 hours sprints. And essentially there's a cave guide who's a facilitator, which is what I do. And you welcome the people into this room, and it's about monotasking and focusing on important work and sort of generating a sense of flow. Mm-hmm. So I welcome people into the group. I'll usually start off a breakout session just to get things warmed up, to transition from one space to the next, for example. And then I'll say, okay, you're starting your sprints. And there's, dozens to literally hundreds of people on a Zoom call who just put their head down or on mute and start working. And you almost feel it's part of an office space where you look up and it's a bunch of people with their heads down. Some turn off their screens, of course, and they're just working. And then they know it's going to be between 43 to about 52 minutes of time, but they don't know exactly how long. And then I'll ring a bell at a certain point and I'll give them a moment. They'll stop working and they'll come out of it. But what I learned from Cave Day, which was really useful, is when you set out the breakout rooms at the beginning, because you have so little time, really, because you really want it to be focused on the monotasking, that sprint of work and flow, is that if I'm going to ask something of the people, I'm going to answer the question before I send them in. So in the simplest form, it's going to be, okay, first of all, the person with the first letter of the alphabet in the group is going to start. Mm-hmm. And you're going to say your name, you're going to say where you're located, and you're going to say what you're working on. And then I'm going to say, so my name is Gabe, I'm in Toronto, and today I'm going to work on so-and-so. And then people hear you, they go into the group, you have the person that's about to start, they've heard it, so they can mirror what they've just heard, and it makes it way more efficient. Mm. And if you can generate that in more complex ways, giving an example, whether it's even just a slide, if you don't want to take the time to explain it, or if it's told better through a visual, for example, I think that will make your breakout rooms more successful.
Totally agree.
Hey, since you are listening to this podcast, I was wondering whether you get enough opportunities to exchange, practice, and experiment with other facilitators. Have you heard of the Never Done Before Facilitation Festival? It's a 24-hour global event that is co-created by its participants and delivered by some of the most popular Workshops Work podcast guests. Visit neverdonebefore.org for more information. Use the code WORKSHOPSWORK to get a 20% discount. The festival starts as soon as you join. Now, back to the show.
And while you're speaking and also mentioning the process and systems quadrant, I was wondering whether there is a limit of how much structure you want or need to provide, or whether you can over-provide this structure so that you actually break the experience. And again, I think there's a big difference between online and on-site, where I have the impression that online we have to be so much more explicit. And as you said, I cannot imagine that in a physical workshop on site, you would tell the people who's going to start to speak and give them examples of how to answer a question, right?
Yeah, it's not as necessary.
Right?
I mean, it could help, but it's not quite the same.
Why is it that we need to over-explain or over-structure online?
Because I think people are not as engaged just from a somatic perspective. Cognitively, they are experiencing all of that through a screen. And the more you can hook them with stuff that becomes, translated in their brain as to understood, when you throw them into that room, they're ready, sort of their brain is already, set to repeat it. You're just not connected enough on you're from the body perspective, from these smells, from all these things that bring you into a space in person. And, you kind of have to set the stage a bit more.
Maybe it's also the missing opportunity to just turn around and ask someone, or to, our group, we all are not really sure what we're supposed to do. Let's listen to the group next to us or raise our hand and ask the facilitator. But it's so easy to cheat, actually.
Yeah.
And then breakout group, you don't have time for this moment of uncertainty, basically.
Yeah. I find in sessions that I attend, even when there is a good amount of clarity, a lot of people will end up in the great breakout room and not know what has been asked. So you kind of have to repeat and mirror what you're asking of them, to really get it. Because even if there's one or two people within, let's say, a group of 4 or 5 that understand, because when not everybody's aligned on what they need to do, those people kind of try to guide the process forward. But you also don't want to be that person who's imposing yourself and your perspective on that small group, right? There's like a comfort level that is, where the alignment of everybody there needs to be established for everybody to just go right into it.
Yeah.
Right. And when there's one person, it's kind of like, I know that we should be doing this, but you don't want to be that person who's like telling everyone, okay, this is the plan. Here I am. I know things. So you're kind of trying to do it politely, and sometimes it works, sometimes not so much.
From your perspective, what makes an event or workshop fail?
I mean, there's so many factors. If you can't generate the right energy,
how do you know what the right energy is?
The level of engagement from people. Okay. If you could be a third-person observer and see how people are willing to follow the host, the facilitator, the lead, if there's a stance that is defensive or cynical in a few of the participants, it can really affect the room. And I say that both virtually and in person. And so the facilitator, when it comes to workshops failing or being successful instead, is they need to bring a certain level of comfort, of playfulness, and of confidence. Not in them having the answers, because the facilitator's role is not in having the answers, but in them setting the stage for something worthwhile to happen. And for the people in that room to say, yes, okay, I'm willing to put my cynicism aside and give this a try. And the workshops that you see that really work, that's clear. It's worked. That facilitators grab the attention of people and they're willing to jump into something that they did not anticipate doing. And for me, it's the hardest thing to do in many ways, but getting the energy aligned with everyone so that people are willing to buy in to it. You really have to get people to buy in.
So how would you do that? Do you have a silver bullet exercise for us?
No, I don't.
What?
I think I try to design it in such a way that I'm satisfying the needs of everybody. Honestly, I think it's a bit of a cheat, but I think certain personalities in facilitators are just better at achieving it than others, right? There are some who are too rigid, some who are not rigid enough. And so for certain audiences won't be able to get them in. So I think there's also a parallel between the facilitator and who the audience is. Sometimes the facilitator is just not the right facilitator for that audience. I talk about this, or I don't, but in coaching, you talk about this. It's like, you might coach someone for 5-6 months, and at a certain point, it just might not work. And the idea at that point is not to continue and try new things. It's to say, we were not right for each other. Find someone else. And it's not because my practices are bad. It's not because my recommendations are poor or that you're a bad, person, a coachee. It's that maybe we just didn't connect, we didn't click. In terms of exercises, I guess it depends on where you orient from, but I like to have clarity. So like I said, I try to sort of check off that list of saying, welcome everyone. This is why we're here. This is what the workshop or event is going to look like. And I try to be pretty orderly about presenting it so that everybody's like, okay, I know what to expect. We're going to be doing these following actions, and we're going to start off with this activity. And because I have a bit of a purpose-led orientation, I also think that purpose needs to come before everything else. Typically, when you do walk into strategic thinking or looking for a sense of self-awareness or whatever it is, purpose typically is at the core of everything. That's where you find alignment. There's 2 things that I like. One time, I went to a workshop for entrepreneurs and about how to start your artistic business. And I had this project and I wanted to attend. And the facilitator, the person who was leading this workshop, had us group into 2 people, into groups of 2s, into pairs. And he said, I'm going to ask you some questions and you're going to answer one at a time. And so he started off, okay, so why are you here? And one answered and the other person answered. And then he said, I'm going to ask you 10 questions. And then he asked the second question, why are you here? You have to come up with something. And then he asked the third question, why are you here? Of course, right? And so by the end of it, you're like, well, because I'm not happy with work. I feel like I'm insecure about my ability to do things. My partner thinks I'm a bit of a failure. You get to this place where you're talking about things that you did not intend to share and that are very revealing, or because someone asked me to be here. And when those things start coming out, people start seeing you as way more human, right? And you see yourself in what the motivations are in a much more explicit, open manner. And I think that relieves some of the tension. I think that also helps people be set up for successful problem solving. Like, let's say you're facilitating for like a social purpose. You're bringing a bunch of stakeholders together around a cause, and there's a mix of like government officials, philanthropies, local residents, the nonprofit organization, the people, who want to make this change. And if you can get to a point where maybe the local, that corporation that has a say in what is there is kind of like, we're here because it's part of our corporate social responsibility program, but we don't care, then perfect. Good. That's good to know. Mm-hmm. How do we get you out of that mindset? I don't want the talking points. That's not what we want. We need to know the core state of mind that you're in as an organization, as an individual, to really bring you into the experience. And if you don't care, that's fine. Let's make you care.
And how would you guide through that? Because I think it's a beautiful invitation, and it's a scary moment for the facilitator, where suddenly you realize, okay, there are people who don't want to be there. I think acknowledging that it's okay not wanting to be there definitely helps. But what would you do afterwards?
Well, questions are very powerful, because then you get the people that you ask questions to answer for you. Right? So maybe it's about switching to an approach which is about asking what would make it interesting in their mind to want to be here, to sort of like get them to explain what would need to change for them to want to be here. Right? Is it profit? Is it, resources? Is it better relationship with the local community? That I'm talking now for the example I gave, but you need to sort of seek out the answers from them, and then you weave that back into what you're doing. And I think that those things will resonate with everyone, even those who do want to be there, to say, yeah, I can understand. I relate to that. There are times when I am asked to be places I don't want to be. And if this would be what you would make you want to be here, then yeah, let me contribute that. It's the same kind of effect of being on the same footing of knowing where someone is coming from. When you asked that question, earlier I gave the example of the 0 to 10. How are you feeling? Mm-hmm. I'm a 1. I haven't had my coffee this morning. I slept badly. I have a newborn. I had an argument with my partner. I'm lonely. It's COVID. I hate this. Well, okay, you're not going to be in the right state of mind, but hopefully I can get you to a 3, a 4, a 5, or a 9 or a 10 later during the day. Yep. But people will be, can relate to that, and they can say, okay, I'm willing to work with you where you are.
Yeah, and I think there's this moment where once giving them the opportunity to vent and just speak it out, and to list all the things why they're just a 1. And then maybe even having others to relate to that. Oh, actually, yeah, I feel the same. Mm-hmm. And then suddenly they're not lonely anymore. They're not awkward that they're 1. No, they're the group of 1s. And this already lifts everyone to a 3, right?
Yeah. And actually, in the why you are here exercise, you will often see that people will be like, oh yeah, I'm also here because of that. And like, I also am insecure. Right. I didn't think about it. Here I am trying to start my business. But the reason I'm not starting the business is I'm not confident in myself, and I'm seeking out, mentorship and every possible kind of advice I can find before starting, because I'm too scared to put my toe in the water. And so that process of going, back and forth with someone else about that, you start revealing layers of why you might be here too, and find those parallels with that other person. Or you can actually do that exercise in a very small group if you wanted to. If you're a small team, maybe 6 people, and go around the room and try not have anybody say the same reason.
Oh, wow.
Right? Like once you say, okay, I'm here because I've got this great idea, I want to do something. Okay, that answer is scratched off. No one else is allowed to answer that question anymore in that way. Like how many reasons could we come up with for being here? I
love that. And if the group is not energized and excited about being there after that, after all these reasons, you still don't want to be here, maybe you better go.
Yeah. And exactly. It's like, well, we have 2 choices now. Either we come up with a reason to be here that is fun and we experiment, or you get, go off, have a nice day. I'm giving you back your hour. I'm giving you back your afternoon.
And it sounds, and maybe this opens too much of a Pandora box and we have to delay to another conversation, but it seems as if you're applying many of your coaching tools to facilitation.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I mean, that's where I come from. Even the facilitation training that I did, Ellen and everybody she works with are almost all master integral facilitators and master integral coaches as well. And so they come with a wealth of experience on trying to work with individuals on tackling aspects of themselves that they want to improve.
So
Yeah, and so I come from that perspective. I'm not someone who's like meeting with like executive boards and trying to like get companies to do stuff yet. That's not what I do. I come from, I would like to do more of this, and like I'd like to help people do more of this. That's why I did the like film race and the podcast making race. I was like, I don't do it, and I know others feel the same. But if I provide them with a weekend, with a context to help them just produce a short 5-minute little audio thing that they're proud of, maybe then the following week they'll go start their podcast project that they've been thinking about for months.
And what I would be interested in is to what extent the toolbox of a coach, to what extent do you have to change that when you no longer work with an individual, but suddenly with a group? Or is it basically something that you can scale? It's a mindset and a way of questioning that applies as well to a group than to the individual.
I think it applies to the group, but the thing is, like, groups are made up of individuals. And like I said, like it only takes 1 or 2 people within a group who are cynical to sort of squash that energy, right? So you have to be able to address their needs and jump on what you're reading in them to bring them into your space that you're trying to generate, right? So yes, my coaching for me, in the way that I've learned and grown as an individual to work with others, plays a huge role.
So it basically gives you the ability to manage group dynamics by understanding the individuals better.
I try to make it as human as possible. We talked before this call about what we could talk about, and I wasn't quite sure, because I don't know if I see myself as like a facilitator necessarily, as I mentioned at the beginning. But, the thing that I mentioned was like, what is like holistic facilitation? And it's starting with empathizing with the person, understanding that they might not want to be there, that they have other things going on, that they need certain things to feel satisfied, right? A purpose, to take action, a structure, understanding how this fits within something bigger, an opportunity to chat, share a moment. You have to give back to them. Like in Design Year 2021, for that event we organized, one of the sort of things that we said was, take some time for yourself and come to this. And like, that was, a tagline, but it was very honest, right? Like on our part, we were very much trying to provide something of value to individuals.
Yeah.
Right. This was like a very cheap event. The money was going to a charity. It was like very, 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 very cheap, like pennies essentially. And so there's very few barriers to entry. But what we wanted to sort of like really highlight was the time you're going to spend with these facilitators is about you. And by taking the time for yourself, you will prepare yourself for your 2021, right? It's design your own 2021.
Yeah.
Yeah. And every instance that you work with people has to be that way. Every instance that you have where you're inviting people, it's like, take the time for yourself. And my job is to make it worthwhile.
And I wonder whether it's when we facilitate groups or help teams, very often, I think if you would ask sufficiently often why they're having this workshop, is actually also to have this time. Time as a team, as a group to think about themselves and how they work together.
Yes.
But they usually don't take because they are busy in meetings talking about stuff instead of purpose.
Yeah, listen, I think the reason there are these massive companies like Deloitte and McKinsey's who are just consulting, making billions of dollars, is because people don't take the time to just think about it, and they need an outside force, a presence of some kind to do it for them. Where I think, and of course I speak as a facilitator who'd like to be hired at some point to do this kind of stuff, but all the answers are internal to that company, to those teams, right? It's just we have such a relationship to work that doesn't allow for a lot of reflection and stepping back. And it's true that, facilitation is about management, it's about leadership, it's about space, it's about reflection, so that's what's happening. Like you said, like a workshop, like why they want to be there, it's because they need a break from themselves and from their work.
And sometimes it's scary. So it's safer to spend time being busy in a meeting. As we're approaching to the hour, I am very curious to hear your hashtag, if you had one.
Yeah. These days, I think sometimes my hashtag is closer to scattered. Hashtag scattered. I'm always picking up different pieces of information here and there. And thankfully, I'm a good abstract thinker, and I use associative thinking to my advantage so that I can piece things together with different, pieces of the puzzle that come from different inspirations. But maybe that's not quite so fair to me. I think I'm a bit more in a place that's not as scattered as I've been in the past. I would love my hashtag to be something like immersed or in flow. I love the idea of flow. Grounded. Sometimes I feel like I'm sort of like a leaf being blown around because there's so much going on, and feeling grounded these days is a big challenge that a lot of us are facing.
Thank you. If someone for a reason of distraction fell asleep or maybe got totally distracted, just realize, oh my goodness, the podcast is almost over, but I don't have time to listen to the entire show again. What would you like them to walk away with?
Two things. One, you're working with humans, and humans have more, a lot of needs, right? And another little tool that I find fun is it's called POP, and it stands for Purpose, Outcome, Process. And it's an order. You start with understanding the purpose of what you're doing. Then you set some outcomes or objectives. I guess you can use the same acronym. And then you finish with process. And so much facilitation starts with process and ends with process and doesn't ever really, and whether it's you as a facilitator who's setting those outcomes, not for the client, but you need to have your own outcomes. And those outcomes to me are making people feel like they've spent their time well, they've accomplished something, and that they were engaged, and it's that's the holistic side of facilitation. It's how do I get every different type of orientation, of person, of culture to feel part of that experience and to feel that it was valuable and get them to accomplish what they want to accomplish.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time and for sharing, Gabe.
Thank you. It was a real pleasure. This is a great conversation.
Thank you. Thank you for staying tuned and listening to the show. I appreciate your attention as I know how busy you are. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and engage by sharing your comments and thoughts, and visit workshops.work to download the one-page summary. I'm looking forward to seeing you back at the next episode, and I wish you a fruitful day.